Good morning, committee. House taxation will come to order. I apologize if I'm a little rusty. It's been a while since we've met, but good to see you all bright and early this morning. My vice chair has commented how different it is having the sunlight come in from the east windows rather than the late afternoon. I wanted to promise everybody we will be out of here by 5 o'clock. And first of all, since we are an exempt committee, I wanted to make the opportunity available. Are there any requests for bill introductions? I can't promise the fate of any requested bill, but wanted to see if there were any requests for bill introductions. Seeing none, we will move on to our business for the day, which is an informational briefing on Senate substitute for House Bill 2313. Before we get into that, I just want to brief the committee a little bit on why we are here today. This bill is not in committee. That's why we're not having an official hearing on it. There will be no action taken. The action that is available to the bill is either a concur or a non-concur, since the bill is on the House floor. So I just wanted to give the committee an opportunity. There is a lot that has changed in this bill from when it went on the consent calendar out of the House. And so I just wanted to give us all an opportunity to understand all of the items that are in this bill now, because there are some very, I won't say complicated, but there's some large changes, some different programs that we haven't seen and discussed in the House Taxation Committee. So I wanted to give us an opportunity to review those. I think this will be more of an informal process. I want to first of all open it up to the reviser to kind of go through the bill, and I think, Adam, it might be easier if we just kind of take it, there are certain sections, provisions of the bill, like the 20 mills. If we take that one at a time, kind of by content, and see if there's any questions. We do have the Department of Revenue on. We will not be going over a fiscal note per se, but if there are any questions for Department of Revenue as we move through the process here and discussion, we can just address them. But I will turn it over to you, Mr. Siebers.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd be happy to kind of go through each of the major components and then kind of stop, and then move on from there. Sections 1 through 14 of the bill establishes the COVID-19 Retail Storefront Property Tax Relief Act. This would be a new act that would apply essentially for tax years 2020 and 2021. The act would provide a refund for a claimant that was operationally shut down or restricted by a COVID-19 order or action. And then the refund amount would be calculated by multiplying 33% by the number of days the claimant was closed or restricted, and then that amount would be divided by an amount set forth in the bill that would be intended to constitute the property taxes accrued by the business. An eligible claimant must be a for-profit business that had at least $10,000 but less than $2,500,000 in annual revenues in 2019. The claimant then must have received less gross revenue in 2020 or 2021 than 2019, and was also in active operations as of March 1st of 2020. Additionally, the claimant cannot have received more than a total of $150,000 in prior COVID-19 related funding. And there's certain industries listed under section 1 of the bill would not be eligible. There's kind of a long list. I'm not going to read through them all. They're on page 2. That would not be eligible under this bill for the refund. The maximum amount of a refund under the bill would be $7,500. Refund claims must be filed by April 15, 2022, unless extended by the Director of Taxation. Additionally, there's provisions where fraudulently filed claims would be subject to possible interest and disallowance, and a possible Class B misdemeanor. Then kind of the last important point that I would note would be that a county should pay the state an amount equal to 33% of all the refund claims for property located in the county. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions under this new provisions.
Okay, I think just for the the sake of keeping everything straight, because we do have another refund section of this bill in section 15, I will refer to this as kind of the retroactive COVID-19 refund. I did have a couple of questions, and I think we have talked about this, but I wanted to make sure the committee was aware of this. In, I believe it's section 3. Yes, section 3 on page 4, about the middle of the page there is a 33% amount. That is not the same as the 33%. I mean, it's the same number, but the total taxes that are able to be refunded are 33% of the total taxes. And then the county, the 33% that is back on the, I think it's page 7, is a different 33% that the counties are responsible for.
Yes, those numbers just happen to be the same. They don't correlate, or I don't believe they're intended to reimburse exactly. It's just they happen to be the same number.
Okay. Representative Highland for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking through this list on page 2. Does this correlate, in my mind anyway, to those businesses that were declared essential? And
I wasn't involved in the actively creating this list. I'd have to either defer to either Eddie or Department of Revenue if these ones were exactly essential or not, or how the list was derived.
okay, thank you.
We have a question online from Representative Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a similar question. I've looked over this list, and I'm trying to figure out who is eligible. Who is eligible? Do we know what kind of companies are eligible?
Could you hear the question?
I think I got enough of it. I believe the question is what kind of the derivative of there's entities or companies that are not eligible, and then what's the corollary of what are eligible. Essentially, anyone not listed under this provisions would be eligible. It's kind of you start with the growth or the umbrella amount of everyone's eligible if they meet the certain dollar thresholds and they're a for-profit company, and then these ones are excluded. So anyone who would not be in these industries would be eligible as long as they met those underlying prerequisites.
Thank you. Sorry if my audio was weird. I appreciate it.
We also have a question online from Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, yeah, I had a question. Some of these businesses and so on are not, they don't file as an entity. If they have partnerships, some of them will file, if they say there's 4 partners in that business, those 4 partners may file individually. How would that be handled? Would they all have to file for this kind of relief or something? How would that work?
Did you catch that? I think he was asking if there's partnerships involved. How is the rebate split up?
Yes, as I go through this, I believe there's, I'm trying to find the section. It may not speak exactly to this, but however, there's certain documentation under Section 8 where each claimant would be required to submit for each. So there's kind of the claimant and then the property tax paid. And there's also Section 5. Only one claimant per retail storefront per year shall be entitled to relief under this act. I'm not sure if it specifically states how, a partnership, if there's 2 people file for the same thing, I mean, there would be disallowance. It would kind of have to go to the, partnerships to derive how they come up with who's going to be entitled to the money. I don't think the bill states exactly how that would be separated.
Okay, I've just wondered that if they have equity positions in those entities too, if that would have to be divided up, you know, based on their percentage of equity they have in the business. This may be more for the CPAs and so on, but I think that opens up somewhat of a can of worms on this. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and I don't know if Department of Revenue wants to weigh in on that, on how we would handle that where there isn't direction in the bill. If there are multiple entities involved in as one claimant, how they would split that up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. The definition of claimant on page 1 is a for-profit business. So we would make the assumption that the for-profit business would be the one applying and the refund would be issued to that for-profit business. And they would split that up however they would see fit, but we would issue to the for-profit business.
Okay, thank you for that. And committee, I do want to make you aware our virtual audio is not working, so we have a microphone set up to the speaker down here. That's why we're having trouble hearing. We just realized that when we started the committee hearing. So we're trying to bring in our virtual testimony, but the audio is going to be a little bit difficult to hear at times. Next question was Representative Helgerson.
Thank you. Where's the money come from? Does it come from the feds? Does it come from property tax, the local property tax base? Does SGF kick in the money?
I believe it comes from the refund fund, the state refund fund. I'd have to, and then there's a 33% reimbursement. I'll have to look to make sure, but I know there's the 33% reimbursement from the county, so the counties would be responsible for that amount. So the additional 67%. Let me try and find which exactly fund it comes out of. Which, if it is the refund fund, that would be the state general fund.
Okay, so the state, do we have fiscal notes? Realistic fiscal notes?
Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the SUP note, and basically it says 44.3 million in 2021 for tax year 2020 out of SGF. For state responsible for 29, almost 30 million, and counties responsible for 14.6, and the next year 24.8 million, 16.6 out of SGF, 8.2 out of the counties. So that's in the supplemental note. So I assume it's FGF money at this point, which is another point that we can talk about later on where the money is coming from. But I do have a question, Mr. Chairman, for Adam, very quickly, if I can.
You're next on the list.
Okay, good. Adam, on page 2, that list again, do we know how that was put together? Was it in cooperation with the Department of Revenue, or did senators just come up with this list?
I actually wasn't involved in the underlying bill, but it's my understanding that this list was provided to us. I can't really get into how it was derived.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, there's no definition. So, for example, under H on page 2, it talks about professional services, including but not limited to. There are a lot of professional services out there that I guess if you're not one of those listed, then you would be available for the funds. Is that correct? For example, barber shops, hair salons, nail salons, massage parlors, yoga store or retail shops. So would they be available for this particular relief fund?
You know, I kind of read it the opposite way. Anything listed under subparagraph 2, claimant shall not include, and then professional services, and then the statement goes on to say, which include but are not limited to, so any professional services would be excluded, and then the list just states kind of as examples in kind of the drafting world.
That's really, you made my point there. This is not very all-inclusive. There's a number of businesses that wouldn't be able to take advantage of this program. And then the last, I guess, if this would be, Mr. Chairman, for KDOR, did you have input, Kathleen, on the fiscal note, or I think you said you did not?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, we did have input on the fiscal notes, and we are the ones that did favor that note.
Okay, and that was assuming it was SGF money, correct?
Well, there's a portion of it that's SGF, and then a portion would be reimbursed by the county.
Yes, yes, and do you know how many businesses projected would take advantage of this program?
When we received the provisions of this bill, we based our estimate on information from the Division of Property Valuation. It was based upon land-based classification standard codes, which we deemed relevant based upon the information that we had. And we came with around 23,000 parcels that could qualify or could possibly qualify for this program.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can follow along that line of questioning, that's 23,000 parcels that could be eligible. Do we have a comprehensive list? I mean, we have a list of the executive orders, but this takes into account, and I can't remember what section it is, but it has to be a declared disaster, either at the state level or the local level by either the city or county, and the actions or the restrictions have to be associated with that. Research or Department of Revenue, do we have anywhere a comprehensive list of not only what the state did, which should be easy to find, but also any additional county restrictions that went further than the state to shut down businesses or restrict businesses, or even cities? Does anything like that exist?
I believe the department indicated that they had consulted Kansas Health Institute information in assembling their county information. So I don't know if they could provide that information. But that would be the thing that would come to my mind.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is Kathleen Smith. Yes, we did look at Kansas Health Institute. They did have a lot of information out there in regards to the different closures or restrictions. We didn't view it thoroughly, but we did look at it, and that did impact the estimated impact that we did come up with.
Thank you for that, Eddie and Kathleen. Another follow-up I had, and one of the issues that I have with this, the retroactive formula or piece of reimbursement or refund is, excuse me, the counties are liable for a third of this refund. A county may not have imposed the restriction or the shutdown, but yet they would be liable. This might be a question for the revisor, I guess, just to make sure I understand this. If the state had imposed an executive order and maybe the city extended that with an ordinance or a resolution of their own to shut down businesses, the state still has their share, obviously, but the city's, the impact of their decision, they don't have to pay for that. It's the county that pays for that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Under the bill, there would be just a set 33% for any eligible claims for the property located in such county.
I know in section 15, and we'll get into that later, there is a mechanism to where those counties they go ahead and pay that refund to the claimant, but then they can seek some recourse for the other entity, whether it be a city or another taxing subdivision that had imposed that restriction. Is there any provision in the retroactive piece, sections 1 through 14?
No, there is not.
Thank you. Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would seem to me that since the counties are the ones that are distributing all funds, if they had to refund certain businesses, then that total amount that they spread out in property taxes would be lessened as well. So is that possible to be doing? Because that would spread out that 33%. For example, the city of Hayes does not rely totally on property tax, but they do get some of it. So if you pay the refund before you send out, you have so much of a refund, is that be kosher? Does that make sense?
The refund itself would come from the state, and then the county would then reimburse the state under this program. So the actual check per se would come from the Department of Revenue to the claimant. I mean, does that answer the question?
Yeah, but then it would seem, yes, it does. I'm just wondering if, okay, so the state sends the check, the county has to pay it back, the county pays back so much, and that lessens how much property tax revenue the counties have, correct? Speaking correctly?
I mean, conceivably, it would lower their budget, yes.
So if their total property tax funding was lessened because they had to send a refund to the state, wouldn't that go down the line as well to anyone else who got property tax income? Wouldn't that trickle down? Does that not make sense?
I don't believe it would, because it's just coming from county general fund. It wouldn't affect the distributions. The counties aren't trying to claw back that money from the schools or the cities or any other of the taxing subdivisions, in my understanding. Maybe I don't understand your question.
I'm probably not making it very clear. It just seems like if the county's got less property tax income from the state than everyone else who got property tax distributions would get less because the county has less. Maybe I'm naive about that.
Well, I think we're on the same page here, but the distribution mechanism that the county treasurers do, that would not be affected. It would still be paid at the full amount, and then the county would additionally have to refund from their county general fund any of these claims. The county would have to find a fund to pay that out of, and then be responsible for probably just raising taxes if they wanted to refill that fund at the county level.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Corbett.
I think one of the issues that causes this problem is that all businesses are essential, and the government shouldn't be picking what's essential and not. And until we get the people who are doing the taxing in the game, it's easy just to shut a business and just to forget it. The point of this is, if whether the state or county or city would have just left things alone, the customers would have determined how that business was going to survive or not. And the point being, to give you an example, if you're a restaurant or something like that, and your Food truck comes in on Monday, they buy the supplies for the week. The governor or the county or the city says on Tuesday, you're shut down tomorrow at noon. In the food chain, you've got a week's worth of food you've just paid for. Your employees have been messed for the rest of the week. It's a loss. This is just a good case where government jumped into something where they shouldn't even have been in the first place. And I get kind of perturbed about whining about who's going to pay for what when the poor person that had the business had to prepay their sales tax, take their property tax from them. They had no income. They're trying just to stay alive in this state. I think sometimes we forget why we're here, but that's kind of I think the crux of the problem was everybody wanted to do a lot of stuff, but they forgot the effect of closing somebody down or whatever. That's just my thought.
Committee, I think we'll just take a couple more questions if there are any to make sure we've got a lot in this bill. I want to make sure we can get through it, but do we have any further questions? Representative Gartner.
More of a comment from my friend. That was the whole point of shutting them down, so people didn't die, which you brought up, which that was the whole point, and that we have had numerous, and I don't want to go back to PPP loans, but there have been numerous alternatives, options for businesses out there to get free money. So I understand Representative Corbett, but sometimes government has to shut down businesses because, number one, if you keep them open, no one's going to even go, because they're not comfortable going into a business or a restaurant. So I understand your point, but disagree with your premise, I guess.
Representative Corbett.
That is a point that I try to overlook, but the point being, if they didn't want to come, that was their choice. It's called freedom. And just like coming in this morning, I had a call from one of my constituents that has a small business, and they tried to apply for PPP. They were out. I mean, it's not, the PPP wasn't unlimited. I mean, there was just so much there, and there's a lot of people trying to get a little bit of help. When that dried up, he said it was several $1,000s for the months and whatever, and I said, I'll check into it, but that's the point I'm trying to say is there's a big difference between whether you think you're going to get sick or you don't. That's your choice. That's the business's choice. And I don't want anybody to get sick or die, but there's certain things government should maybe not be so limited to, because when you have to pay the piper, it's the taxpayer who's the ultimate victim. They've paid for all of this. The money coming back is whatever the cost was, it was money taken from them.
Mr. Siebers, I think we'll go ahead and continue on with Section 15 now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 15 would provide that starting in tax year 2022, a building owner, stepping back, sections 1 through 14 really apply for tax years 2020 and 2021. So thinking about this for Section 15 would be 2022 going forward, kind of getting back to how you defined it as a retroactive piece on the first bill, or the first sections. And then under Section 15, a building owner that was shut down or limited in capacity would be entitled to a reimbursement from the county for the time that the shutdown or capacity limitation remained into effect. In the event that the business owner does not own the property, the bill would provide for a 50-50 split with the operator of the business. Also, if the state or other political subdivision shut the business down or limited its operations, such governmental entity would be required to reimburse the county for such costs. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
So this is refund part 2. Do we have any questions on this piece of the legislation? This is kind of 2022 and moving forward. Representative Highland and then Gartner. Okay. Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this new Section 15, Adam, it's basically sort of an extension of Senate Bill 49, Would that be correct? Senate bill, the one on natural disasters that we had earlier, would that be similar to this because it includes natural disasters, doesn't it? Or am I missing it?
It would include any disaster declared related to a disaster emergency declared. The underlying provisions come from a bill that was both filed in the House and the Senate. I don't recall the numbers of the bill. That was where a lot of the language came from. It was a standalone bill. Apologize, I should have had it on top of my head. And I believe the committee even heard it several months ago at this point. Kind of the new provisions in B and C dealing with the payments and kind of the splitting the property ownership versus the operator. That's kind of the new provisions that were added to the underlying bill.
Committee, any further questions on this section? Not seeing any hands raised online. I just wanted to clarify, it seems like we've got two different formulas here. Because in the first piece, there's kind of a, chart or a scale, I guess, if you want to say, to where, and not to go back to the other sections, but on page 4, it lists out kind of a chart. You know, you've got a range of from 1 to 30 days. You divide that by 12. You've got a different subsection there for shutdowns, and then a different one for restricted businesses. And then in the new section 15 that we're discussing, it's basically just like a day-by-day, 1/365. Is there a reason for the two different formulas? I think they were independently developed and then merged together into one bill. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that was the ultimate result. As I stated earlier, 15 really derived from a couple bills that were generated earlier in the session. I believe these section 1 through 14 came about a little later, so they don't match up necessarily 100%, but kind of the same topic. But yeah, you're correct. They don't have the same exact formula.
And I do actually like this formula a little bit better than the chart, because on page 4, you know, if my business was shut down for 2 days versus 28 days, I still fall in the same category. I get the exact same amount of refund if I was shut down for 2 days as somebody that got shut down for 28 days, because it's not day-by-day basis. I also like the part of the formula in section 15, because that has the reimbursement to where, you know, if the county had to pay this, but it was the city or the state that shut it down, well, they can seek some reimbursement from that entity that actually imposed the shutdown, but that's just my personal opinion. Do we have any further questions? Seeing none, let's go ahead and move right along to the next piece, please, Mr. Siebers.
Sure. Section 16 would provide that the Legislative Post-Audit Committee would conduct a study of the economic impact or the taxation and exemption issues relating to nonprofit organizations and governmental entities competing against these nonprofit businesses.
Any discussion on that? This is kind of related to a hearing that we'd had on I can't remember what the bill number is, but the gyms and health clubs, and we had a hearing on that, didn't do anything with the bill, and this is just requesting a post-audit to try to understand what we're really looking at. Representative Helgerson.
Doesn't the Senate have members on the post-audit committee that it would be a lot simpler just having them contact the post-audit and request an audit? You don't need to answer.
Mr. Chairman, I am on post-audit, and we did meet yesterday, and post-audit does have already have this tentatively scheduled if this statute passes for next year, for later on this year, excuse me.
I guess just along those lines of questionings, Mr. Siebers, is it common that we request or demand a post audit in statute? Has that ever been done before?
You know, I really can't answer that. I've not seen it in the tax realm, but I can't state that other realms don't do that.
I can't remember in my years on K-12 budget if when we were going through school finance, it seems like there was some requests, but I can't remember if it was statutory or not. Been too long ago, apparently. Representative Highland.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll have to admit that I did put it in one of my bills, that after 3 years, post-audit would take a look at the results, but that's the only time I can remember.
Okay. All right, committee, any further questions? If not, we will move right along to the next small section.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next section would be sections 17 through 33. Some of you may be familiar with this, the underlying kind of sections. They create the Golden Years Homestead Property Tax Freeze Act. These provisions have kind of been around the legislature for the last couple of years. Essentially what this act would do, it would provide for a refund from the state for any property taxes that would be paid on residential property that exceed the baseline year for certain individuals. So essentially, if you think about it, you kind of set your baseline year, then as property taxes go up in subsequent years, the state would issue a check back to these individuals who would qualify for any amount that would exceed the baseline year. To qualify, a claimant must be 65 years of age or older, or a disabled veteran. Additionally, and this is kind of a different provision that was been in the prior bills, the homestead must not exceed $395,000 for the baseline year only. I think in the past there was always that hard 300 and some amount, it might have been 50 before, but so essentially if the house ever exceeded that amount, it would kick the people out of the program. Under this version of the bill, as long as they meet that threshold for the value of the house in that first baseline year, whether or not the value exceeds in subsequent years is irrelevant for their qualifications under the program. Additionally, there's an income threshold of $50,000 to qualify. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
First of all, just talking about the valuation there, is there anything in the statute, and I apologize, I have not read through this part of the bill as thoroughly as I would prefer, but is there any provision that, you know, if it's a increase in valuation because of improvements or additions that they've built onto the property, maybe they build a new garage or something like that, add on a couple more rooms, is there anything that restricts it only to the base property?
I don't believe so, but I'll need to check on that and get back to you on that amount, on that question.
And also, I wanted to address the fact that it appears that base year is held firm. There is a cost of, and I'm looking on page 8 and 9, the top of page 9, there's a cost of living adjustment that allows that base $395,000 to grow. And I'm curious about the language, and maybe this is something Department of Revenue can answer, but the last sentence of that first paragraph talks about averaging the percent change in statewide residential valuation of existing residential properties for the preceding 10 years. So we've got a 10-year average here, but is that the percent change in the statewide residential valuation? Are we talking about inflation here, or are we trying to incorporate growth as well? Because if there is a change in the statewide valuation, that's not just a change in the valuation of all the existing properties, that also includes growth. So that number could, I would think that number could potentially go up rather fast, more than just inflation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. You're right, it only deals with residential valuation. It's not like a per parcel type of analysis.
Okay, did we have a question online? Committee, any further questions? I tried to make some notes on this, and I'll go through and see if I had any additional.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I may state, it does state that of existing residential properties. I'm not entirely certain under line 4 on page 9, so I don't know if the department could add anything in addition to what I'm stating, but I don't know if that kind of details the growth component or not, how they would factor in that.
Yeah, we would welcome a comment from Department of Revenue, and then I would have a question regarding the fiscal note as well.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. We were able to look at the last 10 years and come up with a percentage for this exceeding 10 years, and it was around 3.423%. That will, I'm making the assumption that will increase as the values do increase.
Could you repeat that number once, please?
3.423%.
And would you, I'm sure there's a fiscal note or a fiscal memo that was prepared on this. Could you kind of go through that? We don't have that in front of us, but in looking at the supplemental note or the bill brief, it was addressed a little bit, but it looks like the fiscal impact is relatively small in the early years, but then it grows rather substantially in the out years, and I'm wondering if that's a factor of this cost of living adjustment, and just as people age and their homes, they get older and that base value is held smaller, but then that base value increases, so the amount that we're exempting grows.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. For fiscal year 2020, we have a fiscal impact of negative 1.03 million. For fiscal year 2023, it's negative 6.92 million. And for fiscal year 2024, it's negative 13.93 million. This does take into consideration the ending of the Safe Senior program that we have on file at this point. And we would probably see around a $6 or $7 million increase each year, and then it will level off.
Did you run any numbers to see at what point and what year and what dollar amount that would taper off and level off at?
We've kind of done some brief calculations, but the refund is capped at $5,000. So I'm not sure exactly when it would be, whether it be 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line, but we could do some additional work on this.
Yes, I did. I forgot about the $5,000 cap, and there is not a cost of living adjustment to that $5,000 cap, so it would eventually hit that.
Right.
Is there any other questions for Department of Revenue? Representative Gartner.
Just a clarification, Mr. Chairman. So Kathleen, you're saying that this will possibly grow $6 to $7 million a year up until we reach that leveling off point. So we're talking about $60 to $70 million on top at that point in time, on top of almost 14 million in 24, or would that be a good estimate or projection?
Like I said, Mr. Chairman, I think we'd have to do a little bit more research on this as to when it would begin to level off.
Okay.
Just because the cap will come into play as well, so we would just have to do some research.
I had a quick follow-up regarding, I failed to mention the repeal of the Safe Senior Act or the provision, we still have the Homestead Act in place, so this would replace the Safe Senior. Do we have any numbers currently on, and perhaps Eddie could provide this to the committee as well, how much that program is being utilized right now and what the impact would be of repealing that program? Are there people that are going to be essentially left out of the program now because they would not qualify?
Mr. Chair, the Safe Senior program during the last reported year had, it looks like $6.8 million in refunds going to 5,553 homeowners. I believe that all of those homeowners would likely be eligible under golden years, based upon the structure of the programs and the criteria that they have. Some of them might not be that they've changed homes in the intervening time period, but assuming they stayed in the same home, most of those would basically switch programs.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was curious. We would repeal that program, but it appears that likely most, if not all of those, would kind of be absorbed into the new program.
Yes, but of course the benefit is calculated differently.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any, I'm not seeing it because I haven't read it completely yet either. Is there any provision for inflation? And I wonder why they chose the 395,000, since there are some seniors that are in houses that have doubled and tripled in value, but they're trying to stay there, and it's just getting worse. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There is a provision, I think we talked about it, there's kind of two inflationary provisions. There's the house provision that goes up, I think after the first year, $395,000 is the base. Then for the department will do some calculations, kind of the average, the 10-year prior valuation amount, then increase that $395,000 in subsequent years based on that kind of rolling average. So that amount will go up as the years go on in the program. There's also the $50,000 has the cost of living increase that uses the same formula set by the federal government. It's the same formula that the Homestead program uses. So both numbers will conceivably go up in subsequent years. However, as you did mention, there is also a $5,000 ultimate cap on the amount of money that anyone could possibly receive. That number is held firm.
Representative Wassinger, I did try to follow some of this as it was moving through the Senate committee, and I think the $395,000 for the value and the $50,000 for the income level were just numbers that they came at looking at different options and how the impact of the fiscal note. And I think this is ultimately where they landed, just based on the fiscal note.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sections 34 and 36 kind of go together of the bill. These sections would extend the 20 mil school levy on property and the corollary, the $20,000 residential exemption. This would extend for an additional 2 years, these two provisions.
This might be the most cut and dried section in this bill. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 35 would actually amend a section of the bill that was passed earlier in the session. It deals with the appointment authority by the governor to appoint a pro tem member to the Board of Tax Appeals. Currently, what was passed and signed into law would state that the governor could appoint a pro tem member to the board if more than one vacancy existed. Under this bill, it amends that more than one to just if a vacancy existed, so there wouldn't have to be multiple for the governor to be able to appoint a pro tem member.
Yeah, committee, this was part of what we had passed in House Bill 2104, and I don't know if this was an oversight or that some people just changed their minds. We didn't want to make there be more than one vacancy. The Senate brought this to us originally in 2104, and they also brought this change in this section. But are there any questions regarding this provision? If not, we'll move right along.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We kind of talked about Section 37 already, but this goes somewhat along with the Golden Years program. Section 37 would discontinue the currently in effect the selective assistant for effective senior relief, also known as the Safe Senior Program. And this would be discontinued essentially after tax year 2020.
Committee, any questions on this provision? Seeing none, we will move on to Section 38.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final section of the bill, Section 38, which I believe was the underlying provision of House Bill 2313, deals with the property tax exemption for up to 2 motor vehicles for members in good standing in the Kansas National Guard.
This was the original House Bill 2313 that passed on consent calendar through the House. So are there any further questions regarding this piece? I'm sure we can probably just throw this on consent calendar again. So, okay, at this time, I think, does that complete the overall review?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, we do have a couple of neutral testimony. I'm assuming, Leah, they are in-person testimony. I see them both here. We will open up the neutral testimony section now if anybody's wanting to appear before the committee. I'd like to welcome to committee Jay Hall with the Kansas Association of Counties.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I won't obviously touch on every section of the bill. I just want to raise a couple of points and then I'd be happy to take any questions. The major concern that KAC has, well, we've got a couple of concerns. One is that, as you know, this bill is moving through this committee. We also have Senate Bill 286 that is also progressing through judiciary. And so I just want to highlight the fact that we've got those two pieces moving through that address some of the same topics. And so I just want to make sure that you are aware of that. I also want to mention just briefly our concern in answer to Representative Wassinger's question. One of the things that you asked was, can the county essentially just take the money off of the top of taxes collected? And that's not the way the bill is written in section, I believe it's 13. It says that that would come out of the county general fund. So we can't just scrape it off the top and distribute the rest. We would actually take that out of the county general fund, so it would only come out of the county portion. That's obviously a concern because that could result in a tax shift where residential and agricultural properties and non-qualifying business properties would actually be refunding or rebating that money to the qualifying businesses, which is a concern from the KAC perspective. Finally, I'd like to touch on our final concern that we have, and that is that there is a potential that this could chill future disaster response. And for that, I'd give you an example. Let's say that we have a future disaster where we have a terrible rainstorm, flood sweeps through and damages a bridge in the county. The road engineer comes to the county commission and says, we need to close this road because the bridge has been damaged. County commission says, how long is it going to take to fix the bridge? Road engineer says, oh, it'll probably take about 6 months for us to fix the bridge. County commission says, I don't know if we want to do that because I'm not sure that there's 5 businesses down that road. I'm not sure we can take the financial hit if we close that road for 6 months. Let's just put a sign up telling people that the bridge has been damaged. I don't think that's the kind of risk we want to take in the county. For them to weigh that risk versus saying, hey, that bridge has been damaged, we have to close that road. I think that would be the more appropriate step. I think that's the step that you would want the county to take in that particular situation. So I think that for that reason, we are concerned about some of these provisions. We don't oppose giving aid to businesses because obviously businesses have been affected and they do need some aid so that they can get back up and running and moving in the right direction. But I'm not sure that this would be necessarily the best way to do that. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions for the committee.
Thank you for your testimony, Jay. And I do want to bring up something that you reminded me as I was reading through here. Your bridge analogy reminded me of the question. If we move forward with this bill, I think we need a good definition of what restriction is. You know, is it a disaster? Does the, you know, we have a statute, I think it's 48.932, if I remember right, that defines the local authorities, cities and counties' ability to declare a disaster or an emergency. And under those provisions, any restrictions would be accountable. But a simple bridge closure, or maybe a street is flooded or something and they have to close down for public safety, I don't think that should qualify, and that would alleviate that cause. But committee, any other questions for Mr. Hall? Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm a little surprised that the counties normally are very vocal about these things when we mess around with their property taxes. And you're saying this is a neutral testimony. Would you care to change that today?
The reason that we're neutral on this is that there are a lot of provisions in this bill, frankly, and some of which we've given testimony in support of. And so for that reason, there are some things that we're concerned about, but there are also some things that very much we have supported in the past, and some things that I actually testified on earlier this legislative session in support of, and I didn't want to come in inconsistent with that previous testimony.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jay, for your testimony. I guess you confused me a little bit. If the closure of a bridge, you know, it looked like our bill was for storefront property. How far would businesses be impacted on a road closure? I mean, we talking 100 yards, 200 yards, or 5 miles? I mean, that could be long ways.
Well, it depends on the road, frankly, because in some places, if I'm on one side of the river and the bulk of the population that utilizes my business is on the other side of that river, closing that bridge could be devastating to my business. And because restriction is not defined in this bill, as the chair pointed out, that would make it very hard for me if 90% of my customers come from this side of the river but can no longer access my business because that road is closed.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got an email from Harper County, Kansas assistant to the Board of County Commissioners, and she said, do county mask orders constitute a restriction in operating? It's the first one. There are 2 questions. And the second one is, are counties still responsible for the 33% reimbursement to the state if the only order restricting operations was a state executive order?
And I would defer probably to the reviser on that as far as the drafting. I will say on the mask order part, because restriction isn't defined, I can't for sure answer that question. And then on the other part, I would look to the reviser probably, because I don't know if that's the case under how this is drafted.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Wassinger, when we were questioning Mr. Siebers, I'd asked that question because, yeah, if the state imposes that under this retroactive piece, sections 1 through 14, the county is liable for 1/3 of that rebate, regardless of whether the county did anything, took action of their own to close or restrict businesses. And also, you mentioned, Mr. Hall, Senate Bill 286. That, I think their definition, and I don't read judiciary bills nearly as thoroughly as I do my tax bills, but I think their definition did include mask mandates as definition of restriction because it limits who might be able or might be willing to come into that business. Also, you could say that social distancing orders, you may not have a local or state resolution or ordinance that restricts capacity, but if you have a social distancing restriction, that's obviously going to limit the capacity in your restaurants and how close people can be. So that would be considered a restriction as well.
Okay, I hope Harper County got that information because she's watching online, so thank you.
Committee, any further questions? Sure that I'm not seeing anybody online either. Mr. Hall, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome to committee Mr. Trey Calking with the League of Kansas Municipalities.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm not used to saying good morning. It's usually good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to be here today. I want to be clear to start with. We are not aware of any cities that issued any capacity limitations, any shutdowns, anything like that. That was not done on the city side. That was done through KEMA and counties. So just this, I keep on hearing counties and cities lumped together in one sentence, but under KEMA, it treats them very separately, where counties have the power to do those shutdowns and those limitations with their health order under KEMA. So we did not issue any shutdowns. Our biggest concern with the bill in front of you is Section 15, what happens in the future. I was city manager for 11 years, and I worked a number of small and large disasters. Probably the first disaster was, my community wasn't directly impacted, but we offered assistance, was the 2007 Coffeyville flood. When that flood came through, the refinery didn't shut down right, which released petrochemicals all through Coffeyville, creating a very hazardous situation. Under the terms of this bill, when Montgomery County said you can't access this area right now because we have hazardous chemicals and it might take us some time, now all of a sudden they're responsible for rebating property taxes back in a situation like that. That just doesn't make sense to me when our first priority needs to be to protect lives. Take a tornado or a windstorm. We have to go in and we have to do structural assessments on the building to make sure they are safe to occupy before people go in and occupy those buildings and operate business again. Because the last thing we want people to do is go in and have a building collapse. That doesn't help our first responders when they're trying to do other things. And all of a sudden we have a building collapse when it's occupied. It's not a safe situation. I'm also concerned about wildfires. I don't want there to be hesitation to declare an emergency when we have a large wildfire. And we'll just handle it locally. We don't want to declare an emergency because we might get hit with shutdown, so we're not going to declare an emergency. So this fire grows and grows and grows because we hesitate. I think Section 15 makes people hesitate, and I think you're going to have outcomes to property and life that are not good. We've had KEMA in place for 45 years, and COVID has created a whole different use than we successfully used KEMA for 45 years. I do want to talk about face mask ordinance. In 286, we had reached an agreement with the proponents on the face mask restriction, that face mask would be after May 31. Really, our thought would be we only have 2 cities now that have face mask ordinances still in existence. By May 31, they would probably be phased out. So, face masks did not restrict businesses, did not slow them down in any way. In some places we saw an increase in sales after face mask ordinances went into place because people felt safer. Always have the folks who didn't like to wear them, but we did see, I think several cities have told us their sales tax numbers went up after they passed the face mask ordinance. So, I don't know. This is a huge bill in front of you guys with a huge fiscal note for the state and for counties. Huge policy implications with it. And I guess I would just ask you guys to tread carefully and don't do something that's going to impair us in the future.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Calking? Representative Helgerson?
Your initial statement that you're not aware of any cities shutting down. ordering, but they did order the shutdown of their facilities, which shut down businesses. Using the example in my business, conventions. City of Wichita shut down the convention complex for conventions, concerts, and anything else going on, separate from what the county did.
I guess they closed their own facilities at risk to their own facility. I mean, as somebody who organizes events and, you know, is a customer of yours,
Yeah, I understand.
I can tell you we wouldn't have had anybody showing up if we'd had our conference last June. Even if the city of Wichita said, hey, come on in, nobody would have shown up last June because, you know, people were rightfully staying home at that point.
Representative Corbett, I had you on the list. Did you have a comment or question? Okay, all right. Committee, any further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Committee, do we have any further discussion or any comments on Senate substitute for House Bill 2313? We do. Representative Gartner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is really going to be a comment. Bear with me, just hopefully I can get this in 2 or 3 minutes, but you know, there are some decent proposals in front of us in this bill. Of course, there are others that are no-brainers, in fact, and we've already passed them on consent calendar or otherwise. And, you know, maybe they should be looked at and really in a deeper complexity because of all the questions we've had this morning. So with that, you know, one of the things we could look at down the road is looking at an interim to look at both these issues going forward. And instead of using SGF money, that would even give us additional time to look at what constraints that we'll have on the American Rescue Plan money, that we could actually maybe use that money to subsidize businesses that were shut down in up to a cash amount, and they could pay their property taxes or whatever they want to pay with that additional money via Commerce Department and KDOR. With that said, here's what I'm going to complain about. I am sick and tired. I have been here 5 years, 3 years as ranking on this committee, and I love this committee, and I love all of you working with you. But I am frustrated and tired that every year during veto session, we get a bill sent over to us from the Senate, and they say, take it or leave it. This is it. It's the last train out of the station. I'm frustrated. I'm upset because that's not the way this process should work. And we should take the time. I mean, this is a complicated bill, and the Senate gives this to us on the 86th day? And we're supposed to say, oh yeah, we'll have an informational hearing, but I can guarantee you if this thing goes to conference, we're going to get it back. And it's either concur or non-concur. And the pressure will be on all of us, especially my Republican friends. So, you know, I think it's time for the House and House Committee to step up and say, no, 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 not this year. We're not going there. We are tired of it. You won't give us the things we passed that made good policy sense, like the veterans license or property taxes on 2 vehicles. Then they load the 20 mil statewide education mill levy in this bill. I mean, I guess I've got to give Senator Tyson a little positive reinforcement there that, oh boy, you know, they're trying to put the leverage in this bill. But I think we have plenty of time. I think this year we go and we say, no, we're not going to go down that road again that we have been. And let's stand up. We can take care of these things later on in an interim and really do a much, much better job of vetting them and getting all the input we need to make really good, let me say, better policy. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for my rant.
Representative Helgerson. Representative Corbett.
Not ranting, but the thing we see here is, in people, as long as you've been here, it seems like whenever we find anything that would help Kansas live better, business grow a little bit, we always pull out the old can and see if we can kick it down to another session. Just keep kicking that frickin' can so the people in Kansas never get a break. So I'm agreeing with there's some things you don't like, but there's a lot of good stuff in here, and I think by kicking the can, there's going to be a lot of people hurt next year.
Representative Kelly.
One question on the 20% or the 2 mil, 20 mil levy does that expire this year? Okay, so that's the reason then. I mean, I think there's some good things in this bill, but I think we may be boarding the Titanic, and there's some things in this bill that are the iceberg that will take it down. And I think, I too think there's a few things in here that need a lot more study and vetting before we jump on the Titanic.
Committee, any further questions or comments? Representative Blacks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would echo a lot of what I've heard, but I also believe that we have a responsibility to our constituents. You know, I heard the 207 flood reference that happened in Coffeyville area. That's a totally different world than what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with people making decisions that says this business is down, this business is open, and I think I've got a lot of comments from my constituents about that, and there's absolutely no reason, no rhyme or reason that we could not have opened things like barber shops like they're doing now by appointment with the distancing, mask, whatever, and yet we effectively shut those people down, and they are hurting, and they have been hurt. And I personally believe that, you know, when people in authority make decisions, there should be some accountability to those decisions to the people that they're actually serving. And I think this bill does part of that. There's a lot of parts I don't like about it, but I also believe that our constituents expect something out of us. And while, you know, kicking the can down the road may not be the best answer when I go back. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if Department of Revenue is still on, but something Representative Bleck said kind of spurred my thoughts, and I remembered a question I had, and I apologize for going backwards, but on the implementation, or not the implementation date, but the expiration of the what I'm going to call the retroactive refund piece, I believe, I'm trying to find it, I think it was April 15th, yes. Section 6, it's on page 5. Expiration of this, or the deadline, is April 15th of 2022. That lines up with income tax deadlines, and I was curious if the department had, you know, this refund doesn't really tie into income taxes, and I was wondering if they had some input on that date, if that was the best date, or if we needed to provide people, maybe extend that deadline so it's not backing up into the Department of Revenue's crunch time for income tax returns. If Department of Revenue is speaking, we do not have you on audio. Frank, is everything working? We might be experiencing some problems with our virtual audio, so I'll try to reach out to Department of Revenue and get the answer to that question. If we try to work through this bill in conference, that's a date I would like to take a look at. But I think Representative Baker had another question.
Just a quick comment. No, nothing. But I think on those dates, a lot of the businesses haven't figured out exactly how much they have been impacted. I think those numbers are still yet to be determined. So I think the date definitely needs to be addressed.
Just one other question. Speaking of KDOR and county clerks, if you look through these bills, it really, or this bill, in both instances, you know, it's asking the county clerks now to come up and do more work. And we've already, so I don't know if there's a cost associated with their extra work since we've already passed the taxpayer transparency bill, which asks the county clerks to do additional work. And I'd like to know from KDOR, one of the questions is, what would their cost be to administer the first part of the bill on the refunds?
Yes, we can try to get a good estimate on those expenses and costs. Committee, any further discussion or comments? Representative Sawyer. Clayton. Why do I do that?
Like I said, women often have many names. Both apply to me. It's totally fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question, you know, as we're going through this, and I share some of the same concerns that a lot of committee members do, in particular because I don't like the Senate running the House, and that's just a personal preference as a member of this body. But also, as we look at this, talking to a lot of business owners in my district, asking them how this has impacted them, where they're hurting, what they need from us at the state level, I'm hearing from a lot of them, frankly, that they have done quite well with a lot of the federal assistance that they've received. And that I get it, I understand, and I understand the motives of the Senate, but I think that, again, more study about cross-references of the types of federal benefits that a lot of these businesses are getting. I just don't know if they really are hurting as much as we think they are, and if this is really just an excuse to bust our budget. So I've got that concern. I don't know how we can really add that extra layer as to, you know, if they've already gotten those federal benefits or that federal assistance from COVID, if they really qualify for this. So I don't know if anyone could speak to that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the provisions in this bill that restrict that are really your annual revenues on page 2 there. If you make more than $2.5 million, so that's going to eliminate a lot of your big box stores, trying to target it more towards the mom and pop places. Subsection F or paragraph F there talks about if you've received more than a total of $150,000, but that's the only restrictions that I know of that are in place regarding any additional funding.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I think that we could probably do better if we came up with our own thing. So I'm here for that. And just thank you so much. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. We do have Department of Revenue raising their hand. We'll see if we have their audio back.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith. With regards to your question, as far as the due date for the retail storefront property, we would request that date may be June 15th of 2022 rather than the April 15th. That would give us time, the income tax returns are all coming in April, and so that would give us a little bit more time for us to get the program through the processing. We would also request on line 29 on page 5, if at all possible, since this is a short program, maybe just allow for 2 years past the deadline. So that means the director could grant, if good cause exists, for these people to go ahead and file 2 years from that extended due date of June 15th.
Thank you for that. And I know that this program, it doesn't necessarily say that they have to, that's when they submit these claims. They'll be submitting these claims as soon as the rules and regulations and the program is in place. But I could just foresee a whole bunch of claims coming in right before the deadline there. So I do appreciate your input on that. Did you have any further, did you hear Representative Gartner's question regarding administrative costs?
Yes, sir. This bill was just assigned to the department yesterday, and so we're trying to come up with the administrative impact at this point. There will be an administrative impact with regards to this entire bill. We just don't have the numbers at this point.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the good work you do. I know sometimes you don't have a lot of time to and digest all the stuff that's going on over here, so we appreciate your work. Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Thanks for the discussion, and we'll see you on the floor.